Hello, it's Paul Hurst here from Paul's iPhone here on YouTube, from Paul on Twitter. Quick question for you. How in the 1960s does somebody take a perfectly focused photograph like this without autofocus on a camera or anything like that? Well, I'm going to have a go at answering that question, and it may help you with photography in 2016 as well. Today we're talking hyperfocal and zone focusing. Now, to do that, you probably need a camera that's got some measure, some degree scale on the lens. So not every camera can do this, because a lot of this is just kept on the inside of the camera and you never get to see it. But if your lens has got markings like this on it, like a lot of the older lenses do, and a lot of the digital SLR lenses, some of those have it on, then you can use this trick to automatically know that your pictures are going to be in focus. And the best thing about it is you don't even need to use autofocus. So obviously in the 1960s there was no autofocus on cameras like the Leicas, which that one was taken on. Anyway, moving on. So how do we do it? Well, the answer is, at the minute, everything's in automatic mode here. Autofocus. So this camera is effectively doing all the work for you. You compose, you press the button, you get the picture. But we're going to alter that so that we have much more control over it, and we're going to use the readouts here, and I'll tell you how it works. So first of all, we're going to put it at F8. So on F8 on this front dial here, and then when I take this out of autofocus mode, which I do just by turning that, I can now set this infinity symbol to the number 8. This is how I do it, by the way. There are other ways. Please don't flame me and say, oh, he's doing it wrong. There's other ways of doing it. But this is the way that I find the easiest to get my head round, and it works fine for me. So what I've done there is I've set the camera lens to f8 aperture, and I've set the infinity symbol to f11, which is the wrong number. So I'm going to move it back to f8 there. Thank you. So you could have flamed me for that, but alas, your chance has gone. But anyway, moving on. So what have we just done? Well, what we've done is we've told the camera that we want the lens to shoot at f8, and we've set the focus distance so that at f8 we want what's called infinity focus. In other words, things off into the distance, nice and sharp, to be in focus. But to find out the distance from the lens to which everything will be infinity, we have to read the opposite number. So the opposite f8 number here is in between 1 and 2. You'd probably agree it's about 2/3 or 3/4 maybe the way across. So 3/4 of the way in between the number 1 and the number 2 is the first f8 number. We know the second one is set to infinity. The first is set to about 1 3/4, and the scale is meters. So what this readout is telling me is that from 1 3/4 meters from the lens, so if you was to get a tape measure and draw it out from the lens, to 1 3/4 meters, everything closer to the lens from that point would be out of focus. It would be soft. It wouldn't be as sharp. But from 1 3/4 meters, because I'm looking at when the number 8 is, 1 3/4 meters to infinity, in other words, all the rest, once you've got past the 1 3/4 meters, all the rest would be acceptably sharp. And it would be as sharp as the lens allows, the technology in the lens allows. Some lenses are really good, some aren't as good. This is a good lens, so it means it will be relatively sharp. It'll look relatively good. And that, in a nutshell, in under 5 minutes, which is a world record for me, is how I use hyperfocal or zone focusing. If you set the you'll notice that if you set the number higher, the F number higher, the F stop, so let's set it at F16. So now I need to alter that to 16. You'll notice that all the numbers have changed. So now if we look at the first 16 on the scale, it tells me that everything under a metre, really, it's about 0.8 of a metre. So within 0.8 of a metre to infinity, which is where I've set the infinity on the opposite scale, on the opposite number 16. So everything within 0.8 of a metre to infinity will be in focus. So the camera doesn't need to use the autofocus function at all. Now in an ideal world you'd go, brilliant, I'll just set it to f16 then, leave focus to manual, and off we go. But of course, the higher this number, the smaller the aperture is at the front of the camera. So the smaller the iris is and the smaller the hole is that lets the light hit the sensor. So what that means is that you need a longer shutter speed to make sure that everything is sharp and any movement has not kind of blurred across the frame. So with photography is obviously you're trying to defeat the laws of physics. You're trying to capture the most light in the quickest time and use the lens to do that and the camera sensor. And this trick, it does work, it's perfectly legit, but it's a trade-off. So you're always foregoing something, you're always giving something up to gain another advantage. So the advantage with hyperfocal or zone focusing, as it's also called, is that you can set your camera up and then you can just go out and shoot away and you don't have to worry about what's going to be in focus or not. Because as long as you've read this correctly on the front of the lens, if your lens has got it, then you know how the lens is going to perform. So a kind of compromise, if you like, you might say, well, I'm going to set it back to f8. So I move my infinity dial so that it lines up again with the number 8. And as I say, about 1 3/4 meters to infinity will now be in focus. F8 isn't too bad in a normal outdoors type scene. And you might have to push the camera's sensitivity up a little bit from the base sensitivity. But let's say you get to ISO 400 or ISO 800, which most modern day cameras perform at quite well. The dynamic range won't be affected too much at those kind of settings. You'll find that you should get really good pictures. Now obviously if your camera can cope a little bit more with higher ISO settings, then you can turn this up and shoot at f11. So, move this to f11 and then, so we know that infinity is now at f11. So again, just over 1 meter away from the lens here, everything would be in focus. And that is hyperfocus or zone focusing in manual mode, and that's how you get some pictures like this, because the photographer roughly knows that that's, I don't know, that looks like it might be about 4 or 5 meters away to this boy here who's running across the stairs. So you roughly know that the camera's not going to miss the shot as the boy runs through the gap. The autofocus isn't going to struggle to pick him out and fire the shot. You roughly know that you're going to get the kind of picture that you want. And this technology has been around pretty much since the dawn of photography and the modern lens. And it's how photographers such as Henri Cartier-Bresson, who took this image, was guaranteed that he was going to get a good focal distance. So he roughly knows that all this, and of course the boy, which the eye's drawn to here, in the gap in between the two buildings, is going to be in focus. And like I say, it's one less thing out of the equation, one less thing you need to worry about. Anyway, that's how I use the hyperfocal and zone focusing on manual lenses such as this. If you have got questions, ask away. There are other ways of doing it. There are lots of videos on here. You can watch some others. They have slightly different ways of explaining what I've just explained. But generally speaking, I've found that this has been a satisfactory way of me getting my head around what all these numbers mean on the dials of the camera. So I hope it's been of use to you too, and happy shooting!